Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read in May. And so if you enjoy this type of content and other homeschool content, please remember to subscribe and let's talk about some books. Okay, so this last month I was able to get through 3 books. I feel like I cheated a little bit because they're a little bit easier, but that was the only way I made it through 3 of these. These 2 were a lot easier to read as well. But the first one I wanted to mention is The Mostly True Story of Tanner and Louise. We read this for book club, which I think it's next week. 2 weeks? I don't know. I think that's when we're discussing this. So I haven't actually discussed it with anybody yet. But I read this while we were on our vacation and I really enjoyed it. I think it was a fun book. It does have, it talks a little bit more about sex and has some language in it, which I am not a fan of. I try to avoid those things. It wasn't super explicit, I wouldn't even say, yes, I don't know. I don't know. Everyone has different standards. I try to keep things as clean as possible. And so there is mention of some of those things in here, just FYI. But I thought it was super, super fun. It's really hard to explain. Again, these types of books are hard to explain without giving the story away, which I don't want to give it away. But Louise is an older woman. She's in her 80s, I believe. And Tanner is she in her 20s or her early 30s? I can't remember for sure. I think she's in her early 20s because she got a leg injury. I'm like, what kind? I don't know. It may be knee. I can't remember for sure. But she was a soccer player at a university going into her senior year. Thus why she'd probably be in her early 20s. And her had this huge injury and it's just kind of taken her down. She's let it completely depress her. She just sits around and plays video games. And so her parents are giving her a job to watch. They're like, there's someone that needs some help. She can't really drive very well anymore. She just needs you to take her to her appointments. And so that's who Louise is. And it goes through Louise's backstory that she has a little bit of a criminal history. And so that's where it takes this story on, a run from the cops. And there's all these side stories that come in and it's just a lot of fun. I thought it was well written. It was one of those books I wanted to keep reading and it's fairly easy. Woo, my bookmark's still in there. It's fairly easy to read. It has pretty big words and a lot of dialogue, which makes it go pretty quickly, but I also wanted to read it because I thought it was a fun book. So again, I don't know what our discussion at book club is going to be like and what everybody else's thoughts were, but if you're looking maybe for a book club book or just a fun fiction, I feel like this is a good one. Okay, the next book I read is The Reason I Jump. And I can't remember if someone on YouTube recommended this or maybe I saw it someplace else. I'm not really sure. But this is the inner voice of a 13-year-old boy with autism. He's Japanese, and obviously he's a lot older now. This book was written quite a while ago. It was written in Japanese and then translated into English years later. So it was written in 2007 and then translated in 2013. And my oldest is autistic. If you didn't know, if you haven't been around here before, he's high functioning autistic. He is verbal, all that kind of stuff. This person is not verbal, but he learns how to communicate. And some people have taken this book and been like, it's false. He's not, someone else is writing it. There's no way that a child with autism that's nonverbal could learn how to communicate with people and write books. I think he has blogs and he even does some sort of motivational speaking or seminars, I think, as well, which again is how does that work? But I think it's all just through using this mechanism he's learned how to speak. I was trying to find a picture of it for you. I don't know exactly how it works, but it's basically a coded alphabet that he uses on a machine or a typewriter or something. I don't know. I didn't look into it too much. And that's how he communicates with other people. And so in this book, it's basically questions people would ask about autism, why do you do this? Or why do you respond this way? and he's going through and answering them. So it's not a fluid dialogue necessarily. It kind of goes through different topics, and some of them are clearer than others. I feel like for me, it was clear, but I also live with a child that lives this way, and so it makes sense. And the person who insisted it be translated into English, or kind of got the ball rolling for that, is down here. His name's David Mitchell, and I think he helped because there's some other books, or one other book he's written, and so I think he helped with that book as well. So anyways, there's lots of, sorry, my throat, I love it. I love that it bothers me so much when I'm pregnant. There's lots of different things as I was going through this that really stuck out to me, because I relate to them as the mother of a child with neurological disorder and stuff. And so as I went, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. There's some things I couldn't quite see, because again, my son isn't nonverbal. And so he can communicate with us, but it's not always in the way that he wants to communicate, And I feel like that was one of the biggest revelations for me, being a mom of an autistic child, is that he is still his own personality, and his personality is an autism. And so I look at him, he's 11 years old, and I look at my 8-year-old son. They're drastically different personalities, drastically different. And you would think that my 11-year-old was just fly off the handle, like can't handle his emotions, just very mean, all these things. If you didn't know anything about him, that's maybe what you would think if you saw him like having a fit or a tantrum. But then I look at my 8-year-old. My 8-year-old intentionally likes to irk people. He likes to drive you crazy, and he tries to find ways, and he's very good at it, at pushing your buttons. Whereas my 11-year-old, he has the best of intentions. And when he was in kindergarten for like a month before we decided to homeschool him, he'd come back and be like, I don't know why they say that I do this, because that's not how I see it. Like, he didn't understand. Had this sweetest personality, wanting to do good, wanting to be obedient, and yet just his brain wouldn't cooperate in the way that he wanted or that he thought it was. And so I could see that in some of these questions. Like, one of them was, why do you make a huge fuss over tiny mistakes? And Johnny, not Johnny, why did I call him Johnny? That was so weird. Anyways, I actually don't know how to say his name. I should have asked my husband, because he speaks some Japanese. But anyways, his name's not Johnny. That was just weird. But he talks about how something will bother him, and then all of a sudden, like, he just gets out of control. And I think it's because in here it said tsunami, and Johnny's Tsunami, that old Disney Channel show. I think that's why I said Johnny, because I saw tsunami, and that's just immediately what I thought. Anyway, so he says, and like trees or houses being destroyed by the tsunami, I get destroyed by the shock. I get swallowed up in the moment and can't tell the right response from the wrong response. All I know is that I have to get out of the situation as soon as I can so I don't drown. To get away, I'll do anything, crying, screaming, throwing things, hitting out, anything, like, to get away from it. And then he says he finally calms down and comes back to himself, and he sees no sign of the tsunami attack, only the wreckage that has been made. And when I see that, I hate myself. I just hate myself. And I feel like I see this in my son all the time, right? He goes through this tantrum, but then also just doesn't quite understand how it happened or how he got there. So I feel if you interact with any children that might be autistic, or you have a family member, this would be a good book to kind of understand that their brains do work differently than ours, but they're still a person with a personality. They're unique. They have their strengths. And it's amazing once you get to know that. It still is hard as heck, guys. I'm not going to even sugarcoat it for you. It's still hard as heck. But there's moments where that personality comes through, and if you don't remember that, you miss the sweet things. And so that's when people are criticizing this, like, he couldn't have written this. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe someone else wrote it for him, and they just from observing and things like that. But I think when you criticize someone, you're missing the point. You're missing the point that he is brilliant. Like, these kids are brilliant. They have the ability to do great things, and sometimes we hold them back because I don't think giving them the label is necessarily a bad thing, but we call it my son's superpower, and try to focus on the positive things. Obviously, we have to work through the things that are difficult, but focus on things that it allows them to do. It allows them to be pay more attention to things, to notice more details than some people might notice. And I think that's important. We need to see the strengths in people that are different, whether they have, neurological disorders or not. We need to pay attention and be willing to see that they can do great things. And so that's the thing that kind of irks me about people criticizing him is that they aren't even willing to see that somebody that's different than them could have that kind of potential. So just my little spill on it, but I just thought it was really cool reading through this. It does, I'm looking at I always write notes in the back, but it talks about how he loves to be out in nature, how it just kind of helps him. And my son loves to be outside. If I say I'm going on a walk, he's always the one that wants to come with me. And we walk in silence most of the time, which I actually love, walking in silence. And he just observes, and he just loves that. I feel like it's grounding for him to be able to be outside. And the winter was hard and long, and you could see it in how he was acting. And then it talks about later, just another tidbit, and then we'll move on. So you guys don't have to hear all my rants about autism and stuff, but it mentions, I put telling less is better for trips and activities. It's talking about a visual calendar. Do they need something visual to help them understand what they're supposed to be doing? And he says sometimes it's more stressful than not. And, having some sort of idea of what's happening or routine is good, but knowing too much is too much. And with my son, that's true. With all my kids, I feel like that's true. With certain vacations or activities we're going to do, sometimes it's better to just wait till we're going to do it before they know about it, because it might get canceled, which is a whole can of worms, if that happens, or it just stresses him out a lot because he thinks about it. So you have to find this balance and know your child really well to know whether it's helpful for him to know a little bit in advance about something, or whether it's better if he just knows the day of, this is what we're going to do. And sometimes one is better than the other for my son. So it just kind of depends on what it is. And some things we can't avoid telling him because we're preparing for them and it's very obvious, that we're doing something. So it's more helpful if he knows what's happening. But I really, again, enjoyed this book. It's pretty quick to read. It just gives you little snippets, a little insight to how someone that's different thinks about the world, how they view the world. And it would help you, regardless of who you are, to understand other people better and be willing to see that there's something else going on and that there is a person under there. There is a person with a personality. They're a child of God, and they are important. They have important things to say and important things to do. Okay, so the last book I read was Screens and Teens. I don't have any teens, but if you've been around here for a while, you will know my viewpoints, I guess, on technology. I am all for technology, but I'm also for limiting screens in homes and, having access to social media, especially for kids and for teenagers. At this point, me and my husband probably will not let our kids have social media until they are 18 years old. And we're not sure when they will have phones. And they do watch some TV and things like that. But we don't have any TVs. We have never had a TV. It just ended up being that way. And we actually enjoy it that way. So we watch some movies together with a projector, and they will watch on a little tablet. Their world's on a little screen. And we'll have special movie nights where we'll put stuff on the projector, or movie afternoons with dad or something like that. And so they get exposed to things, but we're also very mindful of what they are exposed to. I recently put up a video of us, because we went on a vacation and we had to drive. So I put together backpacks for my kids, how they don't have screens. Okay, there's no screens to entertain them for like the 6-hour drive there and then 6 hours back. and we've never really done screens at all in the car, and how it works really well. My kids are totally fine in the car. You know, I know some people will be like, they're not gonna be fine. They're gonna be totally fine. Okay, but this book goes in, there's so much when I'm reading it that I wanna say, and then I can't remember all the things, but I have a whole bunch of notes, like all the pages with the quotes, and then I had to come to the front page, which I don't always have to do because of all the ideas. And then I also studied human development. So these kinds of things just fascinate me to read and to kind of know what's going on, what research is showing, and things like that. But it's a pretty quick read. And just right from the beginning, it talks about, it says, I'm finding that this generation of kids does not know how to persevere. When fixes aren't so quick and easy, their first impulse is to give up. You know, a lot of the generation growing up, a lot of the teenagers right now have everything right at their fingertips, literally. And so when they have to actually work for something, they don't know how, they don't have the skill set to do it. And so then they do just give up. And I see it all around me, just kids that don't have that ability. And it's not just the teenagers too. It's like the emerging adults, even people my age or just younger than me, that all kind of fit into this category of basically growing up with technology. Okay, we didn't have, excuse me, we didn't have internet when I was super small, but we did get like dial-up later. You know, we had super old printer. I can hear the noise in my head. You know, we had a super old phone, like with the dial thing, you flipped it like this, you know, and all these things. So I saw that transition, but I was also pretty small. And so seeing all that, I, you know, wasn't super aware, but I didn't get a cell phone until I was 18, and it was still just an old, like, you probably laugh at it, you know, you could, phone calls and texting was just starting to become a thing, but you still had to pay, either you paid for unlimited or you'd only get a certain amount. So my mom only, like I had 300 texts a month that I could use. And I didn't really text a whole lot. A lot of people are probably like, oh my gosh, 300 texts, but that was it. Okay, and we didn't even get smartphones till I was maybe 29 or 30. We waited a long time. First of all, they were expensive and we were graduate students, and we also didn't need them. I was at home most of the time with access to a computer, and my husband worked on a computer all the time. So we didn't need an extra device really to help us, you know. Sorry, my throat is not great. So anyways, I liked going through this book. It talks about technology on both sides, right? It's not saying get rid of it, but it's also saying we have to be careful with it. One of the things that I thought was, it was just funny to me. It talks about even religion and God and how a lot of kids are pushing that away. But it talks about couch potatoes. You know how everyone becomes couch potatoes and they sit and watch TV, and a lot of us probably are familiar with that term. But mention how at church, there's a lot of people that are becoming pew potatoes, which I just thought was so funny. But how you just sit there and you don't really participate, or you're consumed by your device, your phone in front of you, and you're not really paying attention to what's happening, and you just become a consumer instead of a producer or a creator, right? You're just sitting there. And so I think that's something that's also important with our teens, to set boundaries on in our homes, in church, when they can use their screens, if they can have them in their rooms. I don't think they should have any sort of screen in their room. You could have a place where at night they plug everything in. We try to avoid screens at our dinner table, which this is also something that's talked about in here. And so like breakfast and lunch, we still are usually eating around the same time, but it's not as much of a, like, let's have it together. But dinner, we consistently try to have dinner together every single night. And, you know, sometimes it's harder depending on schedule and what's going on, but we try, and usually we're pretty successful because it's something that's very important to us. And so me and my husband usually have our phones like off to the side. We just try not to, you know, have those unless we're really needing something or whatever. But most of the time, everything can wait. Like nothing's that important that it can't wait for 30 minutes while we have dinner. So then we're able to really focus on what's happening, focus on people, focus on relationships. And I remember going to this lunch. I won't say who the lunch was with, but I remember going to a lunch and like, I just keep my phone away. I'm just so used to not having it like right in my face or even in my pocket. Like it's always in my bag or like on a counter. You know, it's here right now, but I don't like carrying it in my pockets or anything. So it's always away, especially for things like that. We're at a restaurant, my phone is away unless, again, I need to check on something or it's emergency. And so one of the people at the table had their phone out constantly. And we're like trying to have a conversation and they're just not focused or anything like that. And it's super annoying and rude. And also just sad that they can't find anything meaningful in conversations with actual people. You know, the only meaningful conversation they are finding is with their phone, which I think is a huge problem nowadays with our kids and with our teens. And we're, you know, it's part of the environment we live in, but we also have control over how much we let them do that. And we get to teach them why, you know, why it would be important to not always have your phone out and to actually pay attention to what people are saying and what they're doing. And so I just think that's an important thing. As parents, you need to set these boundaries. You need to understand. And in here, it talks about like, if you are telling your kids to do something, then you should probably be doing it as well. I don't know if I have like the exact quote written. Oh, it's like, if you want your kids to change, you need to change. And that might've just been me putting it in my own words. And so if your kids are consumed with their phones, take a look at yourself, because you might also be consumed with your phones or with being on your computer or whatever, and not actually paying attention when they're talking to you. And so that's also something important to make sure you're looking at. And then it talks about boredom, which I go over all the time, how boredom is a very good thing. And I'm trying to see if there was something else that it talked about gratitude a lot. It came up so much in this book, how it's important to teach our kids to be grateful because they start to think they are the world. Okay, they have their phones, they have all these choices. So like, I know at dinner time, sometimes it's really hard to feed kids. Like it's hard to feed them all the time and they complain and they're grumpy, but I am not a short order cook. They get what they get or they don't eat. And that's how it goes in our house. And they can eat at breakfast time or they can eat their dinner for breakfast if they choose not to eat it. And how sometimes having too many choices makes kids think that they are the center of the world. They have the ability to just do whatever they want, to be whatever they want, to have all these things, which isn't always true. Okay, sometimes having limited choices is much better because then they have to really decide and think about what they're doing and whether they really want it or not. Instead of just, oh, I could pick this. Well, actually, I changed my mind. I'm gonna pick this one. No, I'm gonna pick this one. And that's not how the real world functions. That's not how a lot of people really live in the world. And if we focus so much on our kids and give them everything, respond to their every need, they will continually think, as teenagers, I'm saying doing this, not as like little children. We do this as when our kids are teenagers, they will think they are the center of the world and they will not know there's anybody else beside them. So having this idea of gratitude when someone does something kind for them or whatever, have them write a thank you note, like actually write it, put it in the mail, like show them how they do those types of things. You know, having them have a gratitude journal, things that just help them remember that there's so much for them to be grateful for and that a lot of people don't have those types of things. So there's a lot. This video is long. It ended up being more like ranty than I thought it was going to be. But there's a lot of good things in this book. There's a lot of good suggestions, a lot of good things that maybe you're not even aware of. You know, a lot of times we're blinded by things because we're just so caught up in this is how the world works. And so reading this book might help you see some of those things that you're just maybe not paying attention to, or you just never thought of. And then they give suggestions, or yes, I actually love this author. I've never read anything by her before, but she's so great. And she ties in so many strong Christian values and scriptures. It was so good. I love it. I'm going to look at some of her other books because I thought that she just did such a great job, and I love how everything is focused on having a relationship with God and a relationship with Christ. So, end rant. End screen. We're done with that. But I would highly recommend this book if you can't tell. Okay, so those are the books that I read in May. I'm like, what month is it? In May. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, if you have book suggestions, put them down in the comments and give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.